Hey, thanks for jumping on. This week, we've got Cody Rich on the podcast. He is the host of the ElkHunt podcast, as well as the Rich Outdoors. He also has the Elk 201 course that is on his website, and a huge wealth of knowledge around elk hunting. The conversation's great. We covered some of the tag application strategy stuff. I know a lot of people are talking about that on their podcast, but we actually kind of took a deep dive into a specific scenario around hunting elk. Basically, if you're somebody who hasn't done it a lot, or if you've done it a few times, one of the things that you can run into, especially earlier in the season, is lack of vocalization. So we spent a lot of time around how to deal with that situation, how to hunt specific areas, clear cuts, how to work your way into the timber, how far do you go into the timber when you call, how to hunt creek bottoms. There's a lot of very specific scenarios that we covered in terms of locating elk as well as setting up on elk. So I think it's going to be extremely beneficial for you if you're planning a Western hunt this fall, especially when you think about tactics, the way you're going to look at the units you're going to hunt, how you might set up in that, how you might call in that unit, and then also your tag application strategy. So thanks for being here. I appreciate your time. I know that there's a lot of places you could spend your time, so I value you being here. If you have a minute and you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe and give it a like. If you are listening to this over on Apple or Spotify, if you can follow the podcast and also leave a comment, that would be awesome. That helps raise the visibility of the podcast and helps other people find it. Thanks for jumping on today. Enjoy the podcast with Cody Rich. All right. Thanks for being here, Cody. I appreciate your time, brother.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, man.
Yeah, I'm excited about talking about elk and everything else that us flatlanders over here on the East Coast don't get to talk about that much.
Yeah, I can talk about elk anytime. So yeah, I love it, and I know you're definitely getting hooked. So
I have the bug.
You have the bug.
I went out and got my ass kicked last year, but at the same time, it was fun. I really enjoyed it.
Do you have the bug more now or before last time we chatted?
I think I have it in a little bit of a different way, which I want to get into, but I think I'm trying to start the first question, right now with everyone coming out of the season. And I'm asking everybody the same thing. I talked to Andy May last week, who's, great whitetail guy out of Michigan, but, on your side of the coin, out west hunting elk, what are 1 to 2 things that you are taking from last season, whether they're things that you learned, whether they're things that you tried and you said, that's a good idea, I can do more of that next year and improve on it. But what are 1 to 2 things that you just might, and it may not even be a completely different tactic, it may just be something you're honing that you're like kind of evolving into, that you look at and go, I'm going to do more of that next year, or I think if I focus more on that, that's going to help me just continue to get better at what you're doing. That might help somebody who's, just getting into the game, or maybe 4 to 5 years in and still trying to get better.
I am going to answer that, and I don't know if it's exactly what you're looking for, but the first thing it made me think of it's like this rule or this concept that I think is always prevalent, and I kind of had to learn it again, right? But I got really lucky with it, and it's this concept of like never be head down to the barn. And I think
never be head down to the what?
Head down to the barn. So,
okay.
Like when you're taking horses back, or whatever, and you start heading for the barn, you're just like not really thinking, right? And a horse will want to like run to the barn. And I think guys will do that with hunting, where it's like, it's over, right? And just kind of, either the day is over or the hunt is over, and you kind of lose focus, right? Like you're just not thinking. And so to like quick reference to what I'm talking about, this year, we were talking before the podcast, but I didn't have a ton of time to hunt. And so I had a few days, honestly, was kind of like shooting for the moon. I didn't expect much. And maybe that's a piece of the puzzle, but I had hunted a few days, found a good bull, had the encounters I wanted. And I kind of changed my perspective of like, this year it was like, you know what, here's the things I want to accomplish. I want to do X, Y, Z. And I had those, I just didn't kill one, right? And second to last day, I find a shooter bull. I make a fast move because I think it's going to, unfold pretty quickly. Long story short, bull, it doesn't work out. and I can't find this bull the next day. And it's like, I think last day, I still, basically all day I couldn't find this bull, morning, evening.
Is this archery? Are you in archery season right now?
Archery season. And in my head, it was kind of like, that's it. That's the season. I got tomorrow morning and I got to bail out of here. I, just kind of headed to the barn, like just kind of going through the motions. And last morning, literally bottom of the ninth, and I'm hiking to this glassing knob. And sure enough, like the bull I was looking for the entire time, I just happened to look up and he's, 60 yards from me. And it's like, oh, and I almost got caught with my pants down.
What time is it?
It's like 7 a.m, like just right.
Oh, wow.
And like the funny thing is I probably should have been at that glassing knob at daylight, but I wasn't because I wanted to see some other stuff. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to like check, let it get daylight and then go. And my head was in a completely different space. I was hiking, breathing hard, like not even being sneaky whatsoever. It was just kind of like going through the motions, right? And I'm like, freeze, and there's an elk. I didn't know it at the time it was the same bull, but it was just like, oh, bull, shoot a bull, knock an arrow, take 2 steps, shoot the bull. And it was like, man, I, been doing this my entire life. And I still get into that rhythm of like telling this story that the season is over and you're like justifying it or you're going through the motions or whatever. And I think we all get there where it's like the last day and you're like in your head, you're telling the story of why it didn't work out and what you're going to do different. But it's like the game's not over. There's still 2 minutes to play. And I think you can even do it on the micro level, which would be how many times have, you go out, you're doing a hunt or whatever, and you're like, oh, we're headed back to the truck. It's 9:30 a.m. Nothing's going to happen. Right. And you bump an elk. And, always have your head in the game. And to me, it was, I would say a rude awakening, but like worked out. I got super lucky on the whole deal. I would have been really pissed. And this would have been a completely different conversation if I would have bumped that elk. But got lucky and capitalized on it. But such a stark reminder that like, it's not over until it's over, and hunt every minute that you can.
Yeah, that's a great answer. What's one other thing? Can you think of anything else just from maybe a tactic standpoint or anything?
I'm trying to think. Trust your gut. So another scenario.
I think I want to hear about this because I've when I talked to Andy last week, who's one of the best whitetail guys out there, and he what he does with the limited amount of time that he has, like the guy is just insane in terms of his ability to go scout a new area, and he talks a lot about instinct and trusting your instinct. So talk to me about that.
So same trip, like 2 days before that, I had it. It was this whole trip was like a bonsai. It was the last trip. It's in October already. And I bonsai over the first morning I'm in elk. I'm making a move and I'm dogging this herd. So basically I'm kind of paralleling them, trying to cut them off, but also just trying to be in the right spot when they do kind of hold up mid-morning. And I, moving in, getting closer, kind of like I'm paralleling, but getting closer. And
so that for people that are listening, what kind of terrain, like you're in Montana,
Eastern Montana.
What kind of terrain are you hunting just so that people can get a little bit of an idea of their head, visualize this?
Imagine like mule deer country, like very open, super open.
Yeah.
And sparse trees here and there, but like pretty open, by and large. And I'm moving closer and they're just over the hill. So it's still pretty, there's a lot of topography and from that perspective, it's very open, but there's still topography. And there's kind of a big cliff band up ahead of me, and these elk are kind of feeding along the cliff band in the rolly hills kind of. And so it's very rolly hill. And as I'm moving closer, I see tracks that were obviously from the day before. And, instantly I thought, oh, interesting. I wonder if they came through here yesterday. And it was that like gut intuition of I should hold up and see what they do. Because if yesterday they came through this draw, maybe they're not completely paralleling. Maybe they're going here. And I literally had that thought, saw a bush that was like 10 feet away. And I was like, I'll get to that bush. I made it halfway to that bush, like, I don't know, 5 yards. And I hear a cow bark at me. And she had just come over the ridge and caught me like right as I was about to sit down. And, it's like, I think a lot of people, it's like the gut intuition was there's tracks from yesterday. There's a high likelihood that they just take the same route, like hold up, right? Like just let's let the situation materialize. we're killers. Like if you're a killer, you have those gut intuitions of like, okay, where should I go? What are they doing? You're trying to figure those out. Like it's this constant puzzle when you're, trailing animals or trying to get in front of animals or any of these things. And I think it's easy to overthink things oftentimes. And it's like, go with the first reaction. Like to me, it's most often right. But it's like, the goal is to hone that gut intuition over time. So, maybe you don't know what to do. Maybe your first time elk hunting, you're like, dude, I don't have gut intuition.
I was actually just about to ask you. Like, so I do think that's part of that is just experience, and then your experience kind of parlaying into the way that you perceive a situation. So when you don't have a lot of experience, if you're a guy who's hunted out east their whole life and first or second time out west, where does that play in, do you think?
So my argument to that was like, you have natural born killer instinct. And I think when you're new, you second guess it. It's not that you don't have it, you second guess it. You're like, I don't know what to do. It's like, what was your first reaction? Like, just go with your first reaction and learn from it, right? Like, what's the classic saying is like, a decision right now is better than no decision or whatever tomorrow. Whatever the saying is, I just screwed that up. But the point being is like, go with your gut intuition. So many times I think new hunters are like, I just don't know what to do. Should I do this? Should I do that? It was like, what was your reaction right out of the gate? In that scenario, my reaction was like, oh, hold up, like solid chance they come through here, right? My timing was a little bit off, which will happen, right? But the next time it happens, I'm honing that gut intuition of like, ooh, see this track? Remember last time you got busted? Hold up instantly, hold up quicker, whatever it may be. And I think it's just like, think of it as a skill that you're honing over time. And if you think about just making decisions, right or wrong, what is your gut and what's your gut telling you to do, and just focus on that. And I think over time you get better at making those gut decisions. Like you look at like a really great hunter like Lampers or Brian Barney or something like that. Like they have 10,000 hours to make those gut intuitions, but they still have those gut intuitions, right? And so it's just a matter of like crafting that and honing it over time.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think and even though I'm new, as the season went along last year, and I heard multiple people say that, I really started trying to stop second guessing myself and just say, go with what your gut tells you the first time. And if you make a mistake, learn from it, but stop, debating it yourself all the time.
I think this is
really great advice.
I think it's a huge problem when you have two people, because it's easy to like lean on the other person. So say you and I are both new. We go to Colorado and you're like, dude, I don't know. What do you think we should do? Like your first reaction is to like lean on the other person, and their reaction is to lean on you. And so you get into this like cycle of no one's really making a call. And I think a pro of hunting by yourself is like, you got to make those decisions. So you just kind of have to, right? And I think that's kind of important. I think, trusting your gut, make a decision and go with it. Like for the record, you can have all the experience in the world and make the wrong decision. So
for sure.
That happens all the time. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah. When I went out west this year, I did it by myself, and so it was like that. I didn't have anybody to play stuff off of, but at the same time, I had to learn from the things that I did know and learn from the things I didn't know. And you make assumptions that are right, you make assumptions that are wrong, but at least they're yours, and you're not getting second guessed by somebody else.
And I think this is where like after action review, and like maybe that's a really technical term for just like thinking through it after the fact, can be so important. So, let's say you go through a call or you make a decision, you get into elk, you're out there, you get into elk, you're like, I did you do whatever, you go with your gut and it doesn't work out. It's good to like rethink through those things. Sometimes when you're in the heat of the moment, you follow an elk, you don't really think about what you did or why. And, the reason we have after action reviews is like to analyze those things, to basically rewrite like, okay, why did I make said decision? What was the reason? Was it a good one? Was it a bad one? Right. And like, so we can analyze it. And so we can kind of improve those decision-making processes. And so I think about that too. Like to me, it's like, I'm constantly just like, okay, what went right? What went wrong? What decisions could I change? Like those type of things, like the little things. And it's like constantly thinking about those, I think will really improve that decision-making over time.
Yeah. I think one of the things too, that as I think about at least my experience out west last year. So I think a lot of people do what you just said after the hunt. They'll get away from it and they start to kind of break it down. And some people don't do that, but right. A lot of the people that I talk to do. But one of the things I wondered is, should we be doing it at the end of every day. Because last year I got there, and on the second day, I went in early. It was like first week of September in Colorado, and they weren't talking at all. Like no vocalization, literally the entire week. But I managed to call one in, but he snuck in on me. I didn't even know he was there, right? And then I busted him out. But instead of at the end of the day, kind of, and this is after the hunt, I've processed this. Instead of at the end of the day saying, what did I do that made that happen? I was very focused on the area and the fact that I had called this bull in. And so I kind of like, okay, I need to hunt that area, instead of going, well, was it that specific area, or was it something that I did, within the context of a certain terrain feature or something like that, that if I can't go find him, I could replicate that somewhere else. And I didn't really process, and I don't even know if that's the right thought process. I guess what I'm saying is I didn't that night try to process everything down. I was just kind of focused on, oh, there's a bull there and I need to go find him.
Yeah. The thing I like about what you said is I think a lot of people, I say you go to Colorado. I like that example. You go to Colorado, you hunt 2 or 3 days, you don't see anything, nothing's talking. You're all of a sudden you're getting dejected. It's like I've been there before, and you make a call, whatever. This bull comes in silent, and you're like, oh, there's elk, right? And so I think too many people will. Everything else seems like it's failed, and so I double down on the thing that seemed like it didn't fail, right? But I don't know if that's the complete right answer. There's thinking through like, okay, why was that elk there? Can I replicate it? It's the action, not the location. So you want to double down on the location. You're like, there's an elk here. I'm gonna obsess about this. I got 3 days left. This is the only elk I've seen. I'm going here, buddy.
That's what I did. Right. That's what I did. Right. Yep. I lived there for like the next 3 days and never found him again.
But the takeaway was really like, okay, bulls aren't talking. Here's what worked on a silent call-in. What was the other scenario? Was it a bedding area? Was it a north face? Was it a 30%, 30 degree slope? Like what were the other variables, and how do I rinse and repeat that? So like I muffed this one up. Is there more? So is the sign telling me that was the only elk? Like there's not much sign, but I called in this elk. That happens to people too. They'll just obsess, and all it was like 1 5 point hanging out by himself on a mountain. And it's like, okay, so how do I take the same tactic but repeat it somewhere else? Like, what did I learn from that? And so what is the good? What is the bad? Again, it's like the after action review of that scenario. Maybe it tells us like, instead of just honing in on this area, like how do we find this again? How do we replicate this experiment?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. You're dead on. So I'm going to throw just a scenario at you. And the reason I'm going to throw this at you is I experienced it, but at the same time, having talked to other people that have gone out there for the first few times, they've kind of run into the same scenario. And whether we handle it right or handle it wrong, this is one I wanted to bounce off you. So scenario is you've got an area that got clear cut pretty heavily, and then there's a bunch of timber around it. And to the west of that clear cut, there's some timber, and then there's private land, right? And then everything to the east is public. On the about 20 yards inside the timber line to the east, there's a creek running through it, and it's more of a bog than a creek. But there is literally, it looks like a highway. There's almost no place where there's not tracks, right? It's getting traveled heavily. But the wind swirls like crazy in there. And so how do you hunt that?
Yeah. So, I'll do the best I can here, and correct me if there's. I'll fill in details and correct me if they're too abstract.
And ask me questions too, because if I gave you a big broad scenario,
but I like it.
Like as you go through it, ask me whatever, and I'll give you more details around it.
And the reason I love it is because like I remember the early days. Like I remember seeing the trails and being like, dude, if I just sit right here, like it's dead bull city, right? And it just never ever works out.
I didn't do that because I knew if I sat there, like based on the way the wind was going, that they were just gonna like no way. But I was trying to figure out like, okay, how do I hunt that? And were they potentially traveling? There was a road also that ran kind of right through that clear cut. And so I was actually wondering, okay, are they traveling through there to private, during the day and then coming in there at night? I was trying to figure all that stuff out, but okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so first of all, rule of thumb, like this may sound really simple, but I'm going to stomp out like 10 yards of those tracks just so I can figure out. Cause like, I don't know if that was last week's tracks and like they're gone. That's often happened to me. So many times, that first week of season, I would see a wallow and be like, this is it. I figured it out. And then, nothing. Like it was like they just vacated as soon as I stepped foot there. And so I always want to know those things. And it's difficult because like normally it's like, oh, just bugle, see where they are. Right. And like, let's just figure out where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Bulls aren't talking. Like I
Right.
know that game very well. So like, let's play the best we can. And like, let's stomp out some tracks and see if those elk are still using it when I come back in a day or two. Obviously my first move is to try to figure out where they are, make my best assumption at bedding. So I forgot how big the area was, but I'm assuming these elk are feeding in the clear cut, and there's probably a loop. It's never as standard as like they're in the timber and they're feeding in the clear cut. It never works that way. But I assume there's like, they're in that region, right? Like some version of that. So
yeah, there were some pretty good sized drainages in there that were really gnarly at the bottom of them, and a couple of them had some open meadows at the bottom of the drainage, kind of swampy areas that had a lot of, grazing area. And that stuff, I think they were definitely, there was tracks down in there too. So they were feeding down in there sometime,
What day of the hunt is this and how long is the hunt? That matters.
7 days. I was there for 7 days. And I think I found that creek on day 2 or day 3 is when I went and checked it out.
Okay. So my initial game plan right now would be like, I need to just dabble from the outsides and try to figure this out. If I didn't know they weren't talking yet, I'm obviously going to try to like work around and locate, just throw out some locate bugles. Being its first, I'll kind of dive into what that looks like, but like being that it's first week of September, I'm probably going to kind of stay high on the ridges the best I can, like out of the wind or with the wind, obviously. And I'm going to throw out like, some soft cow call, trying to set the scene or whatever, mixed with some locate bugles. And I'd probably spend 15 to 30 minutes per setup, trying to take my best stab at, location, assuming they're bedding somewhere. I would try this at pretty much any hour of the day. Like I'm going to be hunting all day. And I'll try to touch on like what my day looks like, because I just got this kind of question on the internet about,
yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, like what do you do in the middle of the day?
I did. I hunted the whole day, like 7. I had one day where I came in 11 or something like that, took a nap, right? But every other day, I was literally the entire day.
How big are these timber patches and canyons? Are we talking miles?
No. Mm-mm. I mean, there's a lot of clear cuts in the area, and so it was like clear cuts. There was a road through the middle, and then there's timber patches kind of in. But yeah, there was either a timber patch between the clear cut, or there was like a drainage between the clear cut.
Right.
So you'd have, but they were not miles. No.
And how windy? Like, is it standard like thermal wind, or are we talking like it's all swirly because it's just enough wind to mess with the topography and it swirls perfectly? I'm assuming that's the scenario because it always is.
Yeah, and it wasn't. It was like the elevation was really high, but the terrain in that area wasn't super like hilly and ridgy. It was kind of flat with drainages, so it wasn't like you had a lot of ridges that came down to it was pretty flat. And then you had some drainages.
Yeah. And first time you got to the area, is it morning or evening?
First time I was there was morning. Well, I set up in the evening, but the first time I hunted was early morning.
So you find all these tracks. And like, I think this is a pretty standard scenario, right? Like, ooh, found elk sign. What do I do now? Like I set up, I call, right? And the guy's going to call right from where he saw the tracks. Cause like, who knows where they went. And I don't think it's a terrible advice. And if I had a lot of days, I'd probably like, hey, let's scoot back and try to figure this out from the edges and work my way in. Is it kind of the like broad system approach is like, let's work from the edges and work in slowly so we don't mess this up. And so what that looks like is like being on the ridges around, right, and trying to locate into there to see if we can get an answer or just even a pop. Like to most guys, they think I'm talking about a response via bugle. I'm going to be doing ththese 30-minute scenarios and I'm listening for a twig break. That might be the only answer I get to give me the details I need, right? So I'm going to start from the edges. Let's just say I found it. I'm just going to throw out numbers, but like at 8:30 in the morning, things are kind of quieting down anyway. And it's like, I don't know. I don't want to go just cromping in there on the first day. So I'm going to try to work the edges all day. I am going to slip into like the top third or top quarter of those timber patches. And I'm going to do these calling scenarios 1000%, not expecting anything but a bull to just show up and be standing there. So arrow is knocked. I am ready. I'm probably just going to call from the same position and hope a satellite bull comes up, from wherever they are and gets, to me. Right. And best case scenario, I hear a twig break or something. And I'm like, okay, I know there's elk in here. They just didn't do anything about it. I just don't know if that's best case scenario. Best case scenario, they just bugle at me. But
so you're, just to clarify, you starting on the outside, and then you're kind of gradually working your way in and calling further and further into the tree line.
First day.
Or is that what you're saying?
That's over. First day. That's over like 3 days. So
okay.
First day, I found those tracks at 8. We're probably set up by 9:30. I'm gonna spend the entire day just kind of like not screwing anything up with the wind, but like just trying to check the tops of those timbers. So a lot of times bulls or elk are bedded halfway or in the bottom third, right? That's where it's nice and cool. But sometimes I can get into that same timber patch and not be all the way down or like just on the edge or something where I can call a bull and a bull come work up. Like a lot of times it's a 5-point or a small 6 or something. But if there's elk, say there's a herd elk down there, which is probably the case, there's probably a couple satellites hanging around too. And I'm trying to call that satellite off. And he's probably not going to say a word, but he's going to come up. And if I'm in the timber patch with him, he's going to come investigate. That's my expectation. Now, that may not happen. I may have to like check every timber patch. Gosh, generally speaking, I would get some kind of response, even if it's nonverbal. But like, let's assume it's really hard. It didn't happen. I'm like, I know these elk are here. So in the evening, I may take my best guess and try to be back towards where that trail was and be like, okay, are they going to come out there? That'd be ideal. Maybe I'll do a bunch of calling super sporadically, right? I'm going to call a couple times, wait 30 minutes later, call a couple times. And I'm like, my guess would be they're going to come out that trail that evening. But if I'm wrong, I'm in a position where I'm not going to screw anything up. If I still didn't see anything, didn't hear anything, I'm going to try to find those elk at night. I'm going to be doing a lot of listening and probably doing some calling all night. Like I'm going to come back or stay and maybe I'll go back, eat dinner, come back, say 9:30 or 10. And I'm going to do a bunch of calling sequences. If I have to hike down a ridge, if I have to hike in there, that's fine. Like I just got to figure out where these elk are. And
so you're doing that at night after dark.
Yeah.
Just to try to figure out where they are.
Right. I just got to know if they're still there.
Gotcha.
And if I went in that night and I didn't hear anything, like say I covered 5 miles that night or 3 miles that night, and I'm like, gosh, they had to have been in that cut. If they didn't answer me, I'm probably on to the next elk, to be honest with you. Like personally, I'm out of there. I just don't think they're there, but like, I don't know, maybe I heard them. I heard something that said like, gosh, there's still elk in there. Again, all the red flags for me to bounce on this situation, but like, let's just stick it out for shits and giggles. So, that night we still don't get anything. We call all night, covered ground all night. We still don't locate anything. By the way, I like backing up a touch. I probably would have went in at 9, covered whatever ground I need to, called, cow called, bugled. And if I didn't see anything, I would have been out looking at new areas that night. I would have been, either from the truck or hiking in or whatever, trying to locate something. Like I just need to locate something. A lot of times in those, when people tell me like, oh, elk weren't talking at night, they were talking, they just shut up during the daytime. So sometimes you can find those elk in the middle of the night and like, they'll respond to you and answer you. That may also take 30 minutes of calling, but he'll answer you at night and then he'll never answer you again. So I would have been out looking for plan B that night before I go back in the morning. But like, let's assume.
So that's I guess that was a big mistake I made because I was not out looking at night.
Yeah.
Right. I was hunting literally all day long, but I wasn't going at night trying. And I think that's a really good point, right? Because I did hear a couple vocalizations during the night, like throughout the course of the week. Right. Not much. And they weren't close, but I did hear a little bit. That was the only time I heard anything.
There was a point in my life
that makes a lot of sense.
I wouldn't go to bed until I had another bull to hunt. Like I needed
that's super smart.
Elk. Cause like, it's, those early seasons, they just not talking in the daytime. They're very difficult to locate. And so just being able to locate at night's key. So in that scenario, like we're obviously trying to find more elk. So say I assume I didn't find anything. So the only thing I have to go off of if I'm like looking at this is like, okay, well, I know there's tracks in that one spot. Let's go back to daylight at that one spot. Again, 30 minutes before daylight, hour before daylight, I'm locate bugling. I'm trying to like muster up something, right? If I didn't hear anything by that, I really would bail. But
so what you're saying right there is, there's this road right through the middle, right? And I was working a timberline on the west side, and that's the second morning. That's when I had one sneak in on me.
Okay.
Right, but that's not where the creek was. After that, no luck. So day 3, I think, is when I started working the creek. Now, there's a big clear cut. Then there's a timberline. The creek's 20 yards inside the timberline. But there was this patch of pine trees out in the middle of the clear cut. It was probably, I think it was about 50 yards from the entry exit point of this little creek. And so I set up in there 2 nights in a row and was calling. And the second night, there was something in there. I think it was because it was raking like crazy. No vocalization, but lots of noise, lots of movement.
Is it a small patch that you're saying?
I was in the small patch.
Oh.
They were in the timberline.
Okay.
Right. So there was something in there that second night. But I could never get it to come out, and I didn't move in. And then I tried that again, and that was the only time I ever got, any kind of location of anything in there. So I had enough stuff going on in there that I didn't ever leave that area significantly, other than continue to kind of explore drainages that might attach to it. But I never, in retrospect, as I kind of break the thing down, I never really heavily investigated a potential travel pattern over to that private.
Which could have been it. The downside to the move you made, not to call you out, but like,
listen, it's a huge learning experience for me and for everybody, anybody that listens. Like I have no pride about this. I just want to get better, honestly.
Yeah, totally. So like, you have to really think about where you set up. And like, to me, that screams a spot where a bull can see out and see nothing. Like those elk, if they're pressured elk, they're not going to come out until it's like pitch black, right? And they can, like, if they hear something out there, they can look from like 20 yards within the timber. The same thing will happen often, and people make this mistake all the time, is they're like, oh, look at this giant meadow, this giant park in the middle of this timber. Like, I'm going to set up in this meadow. Well, the bull is just going to look out in the meadow and go, I don't buy it. Like if it's a pressured elk, he's going to stay back. You may never even see him, and he's not going to come close. And, you're sitting on the edge of this meadow that's 80 yards across or 100 yards across. And all of a sudden you're like, I don't really have an option to shoot. Like the elk would have had to come 40 yards into the meadow for me to shoot him. But that's what happened on Primos. It's like, like classic, like, like you watch these videos and like these elk just like walk out into the wide open. And it's like, that never happens in real life. Trust me.
So you really want to try to set up in the thicker stuff.
Totally. It's like, you wouldn't try to call it turkey out into a wide open field. Maybe there's a scenario where that works, but it's like the goal is to be hidden enough to where they got to like try to find you, but open enough that they're not going to feel threatened by that situation. Right. And that's like, write that down. That's a really hard thing to figure out when you're running and gunning, is like, is this the spot?
Thick enough that they can't find you, but open enough that they feel.
Yeah. Right. And that's that balance. And actually I kind of like open timber. So in this scenario where you were like, oh, I want to set out in the open, or this little timber, like, oh, this is perfect, I'm kind of hiding in the open. To them, you were just in the wide open. I like the timber. They like the timber because they know the timber. That's home. Right. And so they're much, much more comfortable to like navigate around in that timber. In that open timber is kind of that, what I'm talking about. It's like open enough that they're like, they live in there. It's not like they're going into the darkness. They're like living in the darkness, and they can stay in the darkness. That's why I really like getting in the timber patch with them and trying to like call them to the edge of that, where it's like, don't just go tromping right through the middle. You'll get busted every time. But if you can kind of hang out on that outside quarter, that outside eighth, even, like, you're far enough in that you're not like this outsider that just walked up to the edge. You're in there, but you're not tromping through the middle. So you're like sneaking in.
So what do you like? You're saying what, 20 yards in, 30 yards in?
It could be 100 yards in. It could be 200 yards in.
It depends on how big it is.
Right.
Okay. So it's relative to the size of where you're at. Okay.
I would say so,
that's, and I know that's, again, it was my first time, but I was really kind of hanging on the edges, right? I wasn't getting in deep and calling from in there. I was kind of hanging, like working the edges of everything.
Which is the right answer. It was too far edge, right? And the other downside, the other mistake guys would make is like, oh, I heard something in that creek bottom. I'm going to go in the creek bottom and call. But the wind, it's a fool's errand, right? Like the wind in that creek bottom is going to screw you every time. And it's going to be too thick right on the bottom. So that's why I really like the edge of that mountain. So if you look at that topo where it like levels out, like if you can find that where you're like kind of on that line where there might be benches or it's more open, like that's a better scenario to me. And a lot of people, like you read the textbooks, it would be like, oh, you need to call elk downhill because they're more like, but that not always true, right? If I'm trying to call a satellite up and I'm just using cow calls and small bugles, doesn't really matter. That bull's not coming necessarily to fight. He may circle, whatever. So don't always take that as like the gospel or whatever, that you have to call a bull downhill, because oftentimes I'd rather have the right wind and the right, like not swirling, or I'm high enough that it's not swirling, and call that bull uphill and try to navigate that, because I can always make that last minute adjustment to get parallel with him, which is like, now we're getting really 301. But the idea is like, I think too many people want to go to that creek bottom, and the creek bottom is thick, it's brushy, it's nasty, and you can't win the wind, like it's just going to be swirly down there. So I try to stay out of those situations. And if you're hearing bulls in there, say you're out there and you're like, oh man, there's a bull in that bottom, I still wouldn't go in the bottom with him. I would try to call him out of the bottom. Now that might not work, may take longer, all these things, but I'm going to try to look at the topo. I'm going to try to look at the satellite views on Onyx. I'm going to be like, okay, where's it? Like, where can I get him to come? That's like a good, that mix, right? I can almost do that from satellite view. If I can look at the timber. So if I'm like, man, that bottom looks really thick, but if I come up here to this bench, I might be able to call him up. And that's, to me, to the way I see it is like, man, it's a classic scenario where an elk would have a couple cows, right? He's on that bench. That's a very believable scenario that we're trying to paint to this bull who's clear down in the bottom.
Yeah, that's really good insight as I sit here and think about, I think I had located, whether it was one or two, because it was pretty close to the same vicinity. I just didn't work it the right way. I should have gone, whether I went past the creek bottom and worked, a little deeper into the timber there, or whether I kind of got on that, a little bit inside that first edge, that kind of bordered up against the creek bottom and worked it from there instead of like what I did. But that's why you do it. And that's why you learn, right?
Yeah. And another like way to think about, back to like what do you do all day? I ended New Mexico one time, and it was very similar. And I keep imagining it when I'm thinking about this, but, what I would do is like this entire big hillside. I knew there was elk on it. They weren't talking much. And I would just basically, I don't know, 2/3 of the way up the mountain, but I would just parallel all the way around this canyon, because the wind was kind of coming up, and it was in a place high enough on the mountain that I had that, but it wasn't too high that was swirly. And in the morning, I was covering pretty good ground. So I'm moving pretty quickly. I'm expecting calls or some action more quickly.
But you're in the tree line. You're not sitting there at you're a quarter of the way down in the tree line, and you're working that whole perimeter.
And in this scenario, I had started in the dark. Like I was there. I'm like, let's get there an hour before dark. Surely something's going to answer. Well, nothing answered. And I was like, well, I'm here. Like, let's work this timber. Right. And so at daylight, if I don't get an answer or something's happening within minutes, right? Like we're moving pretty good. And then as that morning, gets into the time frame where these elk aren't going to be talking and I'm expecting less movement, I may just sit down and call for an hour. So let's just say, 8 o'clock, 8:30, I still haven't heard anything. All of a sudden I'm slowing my pace, right? So midday pace versus daylight pace. Daylight, I should be covering ground, like absolutely covering ground, and expecting, action or movement, because even if those elk aren't talking, I should hear them moving. Like they're moving at that time.
And how early are you starting before sunup?
I don't know. Depends. Let's say that scenario, I would want to be out there at least an hour before daylight trying to locate. I'm just trying to hear what's in the woods, right? I'm casting bugles that early.
I think that's like for people that don't do it a lot. I think that's a really good point, right? Because if you're, somebody who doesn't hunt from the ground a lot, especially like, and you're a tree stand hunter or whatever, you're going up and you're getting in your stand 30, 45 minutes before daybreak, but then you're waiting for it to happen, right? You're not out there calling in the dark. And that's a very different thought process. So I think that's an important point.
And it doesn't even have to be because of pressure. You could be no hunting pressure. A lot of times, early September, those elk are shutting up like 20 minutes after daylight. And I used to basically hunt all night and want to be in striking position as it got daylight. Like I wanted to be to where I could make those final moves and, maybe I wouldn't say anything for the last hour, but I was like trying to be as close as I could because I knew basically those elk were going to shut up and walk away 20 minutes after daylight. And that was my window. And then I had all day to basically do nothing. So
you would just sleep. You'd basically hunt at night, try to locate, strike early in the morning, and then you just sleep in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
Is that where you got your sleep?
Yeah. Yeah. And like sometimes, like sleep where like there was, if it's a short hunt, like, I should be checking wallows. I should be checking creek bottoms in the mornings, like all morning, taking cat nap, like just sleep when you can. I'm older now. I don't do this nearly like I used to. I used to go real hard. Like nobody wanted to hunt with me because I would just go.
I was going to say that sounds pretty freaking brutal, dude.
I'm an old man now. Like if you want to go hard, that's the way to do it though. Like you should be, and I'd be up all night driving, looking for tracks, like just slamming 5-hour energies. Like it was my job. And so like, there's things you can do all day. And, so back to like, I know that I'll try to answer the question that I got asked on the internet, which was like, what do you do in the middle of the day? So in the middle of the day, in your scenario, I know there's elk, there's timber. Like I'm actually hunting those Colorado bulls by calling. So I'm going to slow down, right? I'm going to slow down. Maybe I fall asleep on a call set, right? But basically I could spend an hour or two at each set, move 200 yards and do a full set again. Like nothing was.
And what does that look like when you slow down, you're doing a set? What's the frequency? Like, what are you doing? Just kind of talk through that.
Yeah. So like hypothetically, let's say I move in, nice open timber. I probably got some 40-yard shots. I like this spot. So I sit down and I'm just going to throw out a couple cow calls, real soft, nothing special. I might wait 3 to 5 minutes, throw out a cow calf reaction, nothing crazy. A couple minutes later, maybe I'll throw another couple cow calls. Let's say 5 to 6, just spice it up a little bit. 10 minutes later, so we're, 15 minutes into this now. Maybe I do a little spike bugle, or a bed bugle, just like, ooh, just something soft. And then maybe I'll wait like 10 minutes and just sit there and listen, have Sammy, whatever, couple more cow calls. You could do that scenario right there, just kind of on rinse and repeat for hours. And I've done it to where an hour later, I get just a from the bed bugle back, just a woo. And it's like, there he is, and I've done that where, say 10 a.m., I get a bed bugle. I didn't get another bed bugle till 12, and I'm like, he's there. He just doesn't want to say anything. And by 2, I'll just call all day like that, every 15, 30 minutes, whatever it may be. And by 2 or 3, he's, you can hear him get up and he's now more vocal. And, I've had this scenario where it's like, you basically talked him into it over 5 hours.
And at this point though, where he is.
Yeah, I know where
because
he is.
He's responded to you enough. And so you're kind of set. You're thinking about your setup.
I'm not even thinking about my setup. Honestly, my entire goal is to raise his temperature. I don't even want to go in there when he's that dead to the world. Like I still don't know if he's got cows. I don't know what the scenario is. Like clearly he's not that excited, but if I spend the next 5 hours trying to increase his temperature, oftentimes by 3 or 4 in the afternoon, he's fired up and he's ready to go. And then it's like, okay, usually I can tell by what they do when they get up. If they have cows, a lot of times, cows are going to want to go their own way and he's just going to start following him. If he gets excited and then starts walking away, that means he has cows. And if he, keeps sitting there and he keeps maybe come closer, a lot of times when they're by themselves, he'll shut up for a while and then, he'll all of a sudden be closer or he'll go back away. It's like, to me, that says bachelor group. Like there's a couple bulls there that are answering me, or hanging out together. They're not necessarily coming in. A lot of times the solo bull will come in. And so, you're kind of just trying to read what the scenario is, based on, kind of what they're moving. And this is why you're trying to gather that intel. It's not like, oh, run down there and kill him and a bull answered me. I think so many people they get that answer, run over there and challenge bugle. Like it's just that's not what's going to happen, right? Like you got to work that temperature up. You got to work into that scenario. And maybe the challenge bugle works, but like there's a bunch of details we need first. And hopefully we can change that situation between now and when it happens. It's like the best opportunity for that, maybe later this evening. It may be tomorrow for all we know. But like, so those are kind of like what I'm doing midday in the scenario we're talking about. Another option for midday, is checking tracks, checking water, looking for a sign, those type of things.
I think just before you go forward, I think just to kind of focus on accentuate that point that you just made, right? Yes. So for whitetail hunters, it's okay. You see him and you want the shot, right? It's the concept of, raising the temperature of the animal, spending 4 to 5 hours doing that, potentially not even moving in and shooting them that day, but thinking, hey, tomorrow might be a day. Like that's a completely different thought process, right? That you have to get your arms around, and to be patient enough to not think I have to go in and do this right now.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is applicable to the whitetail, but it's like just because you see a buck doesn't mean you can just smash your rattles together and he's going to come running in. And I think that's the way people treat elk. And it's like, there's a day. There's been bulls that I've killed. Actually, there's this bull right here. This bull right here, I called in a week before. I actually found him probably before that. Wasn't hot. I called him in, let's just say a week or two before, and he came in completely silent. He had answered the night before. In the daylight, I called him in. He came in completely silent, got above me, heard one twig snap, and then I felt the wind, and he was like, I never even heard anything. That was it. It was the end of it. And I came back a few days later. He answered one time in the night, but wouldn't answer me in the daylight. And I was like, well, I know where he is. And so like a few days later, I come back and I'd been out all night that night, didn't find anything. And I was like, I'm gonna go check on that bull one more time. I go in and I locate him in the daylight, and he just absolutely covers me up on a bugle. And it was like, then he covered me up again. It was just like, he was so hot. I was like, oh, today's the day. And that took a week and a half to kill that bull. And I was off looking for other elk. It wasn't like I was there every day, but I knew where he was. And, he just didn't want to play the game until that day. And it must, what happens, like, if you want to understand, it's like a bull could be in there. He could even have cows, but he may not have hot cows. The day he has a hot cow, he is dumb as a box of rocks, right? And he just wants to fight. Or you never know. Like sometimes there's just another bull harassing his herd, and that's the day he is all fired up. Maybe there's not another satellite around and he's just doing his thing, and he's, that type of bull. And then the day you there, all of a sudden it's like another bull just has been pestering him all day. And it's like, that's the day to like get in there, because he's going to be very, very aggressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's somewhat applicable to, to whitetail, to the difference between a doe group having a doe that's in heat, and then the other bucks, kind of trying to battle to get in there versus a doe group with none of them and estrus, and then they're just not nearly as responsive to that, whether you're going to rattle them or whatever. So that's a great point. What's your call sequence sound like first thing in the morning? So we just talked about what it sounded like, when you slow down, you're out there, the sun's coming up. What's that call sequence sound like? You've been out there all night or doing whatever, an hour beforehand. Now, what are you calling like?
Honestly, it depends a lot. Time of year. So time of September, I should say. So early season, things are slower. So you have to kind of slow play. I'm still much faster than like a midday early season, but like if it's peak rut, gosh, I mean, I don't call as much as I used to. I would say if it's peak rut, like say, I don't know, September 20th. September 20th, I'm probably just casting locates and moving. Like that's it, and like I'm not really trying to throw the cow calls, maybe a couple cow calls, but if I don't get a response literally within 60 to 90 seconds, like we're on to the next thing. We got to move. Like you got to cover more ground. I'd rather cover 10 miles in a day, then, you know, focus on this one spot, which is a very different. I think people struggle with that concept of, you know, when do I, you know, sit on this one bull for 5 hours and when do I cover 5 miles? You know, like, and that's, you know, maybe we're going back to gut intuition, but it's like, you got to learn those things. And, you know, peak rut, if I'm not hearing or seeing something, I'm very much covering ground and moving quickly because I'm trying to find them. If I bump elk, that's fine.
How much ground are you covering between calls? You call, you don't get anything, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, you're moving. How far do you move before you're calling again?
It's going to be very dependent on the location, right? Like if I'm looking out and like, okay, that's where the elk are. It may be a mile before I call again, right? Like, so that open country is a little bit different. I would say as little as 200 yards, maybe even 100 yards. Like, I don't think that's unrealistic to say like, you know, I went 100 yards. I'm like, gosh, this hole looks good. Like I should try it again. You know, and I think people can overcall, but like I may also go a mile without calling. So, it's going to depend on the terrain. And just, if I look at it and say like, there should be elk in here, like somewhere in here, you know, I think you use your bugle tube as if it was optics. You know, I hunt a lot more open country now and I use my optics a lot more, but you know, a lot of the stuff I hunted before was very much like we were just trying to cover the ground with our bugle tube because we couldn't see anything. So, you know, if you can see, use that. If you can't see, use the tube. The tube doesn't always work. Don't be solely reliant on it. I think is a big lesson. And I think in 2025 and on, you know, like a lot of the things, you know, a lot of my lessons were learned in 2008 to 2014, right? When elk were elk and they called, and things are different now. And so they just don't as much. And so I think a lot of people like they do this locate bugle. They're like, well, nothing here, you know, elk aren't talking. And it's like, you know, this classic saying, but it's, don't always trust it. Like that's the answer, right? They can definitely still be there.
Yeah. So you kind of segued out, you know, into my next question for me. And that is, can you talk a little bit about, and not specifically Colorado, because that's kind of getting talked about a lot, but just more for people's application strategy that are, you know, they don't live in a Western state, right? So they don't have an in-state place to apply. How does the change in Colorado going to a point system change the way that you would tell somebody to look at their tag application strategy as a whole across the West?
I would say, and I'm actually not a huge proponent of Colorado. I think it's a poor at-bat state. So, you know, what I try to teach or preach, whichever soapbox I'm on, is to get at-bats. And I think you need to build, you know, back to what we started talking about was, you know, gut intuition. So you want to build that gut intuition to make good decisions. So much of Colorado is like one at-bat seasons that it's like you're not learning fast enough. I'd rather you literally couldn't shoot an elk, but you were getting more at-bats. That's a more useful way to become a better elk caller or a better elk hunter, is to like go to a place where you can't even use your bow, right? Like that's like, honestly, like go do that. So many people go to Colorado and then like they just, you know, they get one at bat per year. And I'm like, it's going to take you 30 years to even kill an elk.
Yeah. That is so true, because there's no feedback loop.
No.
Right. You're out there trying things.
Yeah.
But when you don't get at bats, you don't know whether what you're doing is right or wrong. You're just getting zero feedback.
Yeah.
So knowing that, like and I'm not asking for, you know, zones or regions or even areas, but just knowing that from a perspective of states that are going to give you better at bats, you know, where should people be looking at?
So I guess to my point of that is like, you know, I think you have to build a national strategy these days. Mm-hmm. And you know, a lot of these, it used to be to where you build a 5-year strategy, and the goal was like, you'd have a really good tag every 5 years. And if you were doing that in 5 states, you're hunting a really good tag every year.
Then you're hunting every year. Yeah.
Super simplistic concept that does not work anymore.
I'm glad you brought that up too, because people are still like, I still hear people saying that's the strategy, right? It's like, okay, if you're building points in Montana and Wyoming, and, you know, I know New Mexico's as a draw state, and so you can't build points. But if you're doing that in 5 different states, you can hunt every year. But you're saying no, that's not really the case anymore.
Yes and no.
Is it because of point creep? Why is that the case?
It's just, there's not 5 good states that works in. So, oh yeah, what tag are you drawing in Nevada, right? Like, so I think it does work and it doesn't work. I lean more towards like having 2 or 3 good states. That to me is more realistic. So let's just say, gosh, and it's hard to even say Wyoming anymore, but maybe it's a Wyoming, Colorado, Montana.
And why is it hard to say Wyoming? Just because
it takes 5 points.
The amount of points it takes to hunt there now. You used to be able to hunt with 2 to 3, and now it takes 5.
The problem with a 5-year strategy is that, like, say you hunt one state, and then the next year you're hunting a new state. You're not compounding the learning curve of the area. So exactly. Like, ideally, the upside of Colorado is you hunt the same place every year. So in theory, you're getting better. The problem is it's so low that it doesn't really do that. You're not compounding because there's no at-bats.
You may be getting to know the area.
Still zero.
You may know the area better, but if you're not getting at-bats, you're still not learning anything other than, I know this area better.
Right. And so the downside to the 5-year strategy is you're hunting new places every 5 years and everything changed. So like somewhere in the middle, to me, makes more sense. And it's like, okay, I go to Montana, and I actually am a huge proponent of trying to learn new areas, right? And I do think that like you should mix that, because one of the greatest skills I have is I can go anywhere in the world and find elk. And I don't say that like braggadociously. It's like I've done it enough. Like I have a lot of confidence that I can go somewhere and find elk. And I think that's a crazy skill set to own. With that said, like your entire strategy should be not killing 320 bulls. It should not be killing 6 points even. It should be getting at bats. And I think one of the best ways to do that is, maybe we'll call it a 3-year strategy. So I put Utah spike hunts in that. I think some of those spike hunts, and I'm going to be armchair quarterback here, complete transparency. I've never done it. I keep saying I'm going to. It's just, I have tags every year, so it's difficult. But,
you're also coming from a place of,
you've
been doing this for a long time. You were able to cut your teeth way before, archery elk hunting became a thing, and you were able to get it. You didn't have to go do that to get at bats, but we're in a different world.
Yeah.
So I think, you're coming from a place of like, hey, if I were starting today, this is what I would do, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I don't know what the whitetail version is. Like, basically I learned to hunt whitetail on Lee and Tiffany's ranch. I used to have 10-point hunts every single year, and just like pass bull after bull. So if I was starting today, I really do like the Utah spike hunts, because I would go in there like I was hunting 350 bulls, right? Like, I'm not trying to target spikes. I'm trying to target herds, and I'm learning how to hunt herds of elk. I'm going in there from increasing my performance and focusing on my skill sets, stalking elk, getting close to elk, like locating elk, like all of those things. Cause I do think that like you could just go hunt spikes very differently. And so success is not the goal. It's experiences. Like, I'm going to make a target list of like, here's the experiences I want. I want to dog a herd. I want to get close to a lead cow. I want to these are like, if you focused on the skill of becoming a better elk hunter, that's, and when a spike steps out, I'll shoot it. So like, I do love that concept. And I think you get a lot more at-bats in those units. People get mad at me when I say that, because there are guys trophy hunting those units, and they're like, God dang spike hunters. And then there's Cody Rich just telling people to do
Damn it, Cody, don't send those freaking people in here for spikes. I'm hunting some big dogs.
Yeah. So like, stay out of people's way. If someone's hunting a bull, don't be a dick, all those things. But yeah, I do love the Utah stuff. And so like, when I couldn't get a tag, that would be my first choice. Outside of that, I think even with the new changes, there's going to be some decent at-bat units for Colorado in that, 2 to 3 point range. And that's kind of where I would start focusing. It's like, focus on those. And by the way, if I had 6 points in Colorado, I would still go to a 2-point unit because of that compounding effect, right? Like, I would rather hunt a 2-point unit and know I could go back and do that, because I'm building that into a long-term strategy. I just had this conversation with my brother-in-law. He was like, I have 9 points. I'm not burning it on a 3-point unit. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. Like, this is the strategy, right? Like, it doesn't matter how many coins you have. You want this unit. Anyway. So, I'm looking for a Colorado 3-point unit. And then I'm going to piggyback Montana in there for at-bats. I think Montana general season, great at-bats, decent at-bats, location. And so I can bounce between those 3, and I'm still building points, say in a Wyoming, where else can we go? Maybe in Arizona. Some of those other hunts, moonshot hunts, right? Nevada, I put in the moonshot category. I don't think Oregon is off the table either. Like I think there's some decent hunts there. And so it's like you have like these 3-year plays, and then you have the 5-year plays, and then you have like the 10, 15-year plays, which is the Arizona and Nevadas. And I think, you're going to build those skill sets. And when you get there, you're going to have the skills to go tackle those 10 to 15 point hunts. I do think you could just do those 3, like Colorado, Utah, Montana, and Idaho when you can, right? Like Idaho's a good at bat state. Some of the draws, are decent draw odds. Those would be decent, get a tag when you can. And that's a pretty solid, like 3-year strategy with like, a sprinkle of, in 5 years, you'll have your Wyoming tag. I think that's a good one. And just focus on the skills.
Yeah, that's great advice. What does the weather look like? I've heard a couple of people talk about potentially like a lack of rain, potential drought situation this off season. What do you see in there, and what's the conversation around off season weather pattern?
I don't focus on it a ton. I will tell you, Montana got a record January and February. We got dumped on. So, in theory, I don't really care what the winter does. More winter kill than anything, but elk are pretty resilient. I'm more interested in this.
Did anybody in June? Y'all didn't have like a terrible winter, did you? Like, everyone had a pretty decent.
I feel like we're only halfway through here. What are you talking about?
Well, sorry, I live in South Carolina. It's springtime. It's 70 degrees today, so we're like, hey, it's spring.
Well, I joke because it's.
I forgot y'all are still in the winter.
It's 50 today. Like it's yeah.
Oh, that's like nice. That's warm.
Yeah, we got a problem. We got 49 inches of snow last 2 months, and now it's 50 degrees. So we got a slushy mess.
Yeah,
people do think it's spring, but it's definitely still winter until mid-May for us.
Mm-hmm. Don't get over my skis.
Yeah.
You're so halfway through. That makes sense.
I don't overthink it. Like I think people talk a lot about moon phase. What best week? To me, I think if you really want to become a good elk hunter, take the most time you can. Like that's the thing that matters. Like figure out how to hunt 20 days a year. Like you really want to be good. You're doing 2 years of work in 1 year. Like if you just look at it that way, if you can do 30 days, like that's 3 years of learning in 1 year. So I know that's not applicable to everyone, but the best you can. And then grind harder than you think. And, I talk a lot about race pace. So I grew up racing, and, I think one of the lessons I learned when I went pro, I say that loosely, was like, oh, these guys run at a different pace, and you race on the local racetrack, right? There's a certain pace. When you go to a national level, it's like, oh, this is a different pace. And I talk about that with elk hunting. And I think if you ever get the chance to learn from, a great elk hunter, that's a huge opportunity, because you learn what race pace looks like, and you learn like how to operate. And I think if I had to default, I would say most people don't realize what it takes to be consistent in elk. And it's like, I'm not saying you have to be out all night every night, but like you got to be going hard. I think if you're hunting mornings and evenings for a couple hours, like,
yeah,
it's not going to do it. It will do it if you have 30 days. Like that's but I've been doing this a long time, and it still takes me 20 days. So
yeah, I was going to say I think sometimes like people like me get frustrated. You go out there, you hunt really, really hard for a week, but then, I heard, Brian Varney talk last, I think he was saying it took him 20 or 22 days last season. Mm-hmm. It's like, and you guys are hunting all the time, so it's not like
say that, but like, I would say yes.
No, you're not.
Well, I mean, like, and you have, I've had years where I've had 3 tags in September, and you got to go super hard on all of them. If you only have a week, you got to run a really, really high pace, right? I think when you have 30 days, you get the, Barney operates at a different level. Like every stock he goes on is a kill. So like he just has to find the right one. And a lot of times the way he's hunting doesn't require that same race pace, right? Like he has the time. And I would say like, depending on what you're looking for, you spend a lot more time, playing it slow than you do going fast. When you're targeting big bulls, it's a completely different game. But I would say, trying back to the concept of like, if you only have a week, gosh, it's going to be really difficult. I think the best hunters in the world will tell you like, I'm not that good. I spend way too much time doing it. And it's like, key in on that phrase, double click on that phrase. Cause that's the most important thing. The greatest hunters in the world will all tell you they're not that good. They just have a lot of time. And it's like, that's what it takes. Like, yeah, it just takes days and days and like building and learning and like trying to like get in the right situation. And maybe it's luck, right? Like maybe it's just be in the right place enough times and you get lucky. And I don't discount that at all.
No, I think that's really good advice. Time spent. You can't replace time spent in the woods with anything. It doesn't matter, how good you are on e-scouting or how good you are on anything. The time you spend out there is gonna pay dividends for you. And the thing that you just said a minute ago, which I think is also a double click, is if you get the chance to go with somebody that is good, you need to jump on it, right? So I just got invited to go with someone who's been elk hunting for a long time, and this is, it's private in Colorado, but it's guided, and it's basically like there's a big herd, and he's like, I've hunted this place for 10 years in a row, and we get a stalk at least twice a day.
Yeah.
He's like, you are going to get more at bats in 5 days doing that than you will in like 10 years going and doing what you did last year. He's like, if you want to learn, this is where you go. And I'm like, yes, sign me up. Like I think what you said is really important. If you can get around people that know what they're doing, and get in a situation where you can either learn from them or they can, give you an opportunity to get at bats, like that's invaluable.
Totally. And I think like just being around elk, there's levels to at bats. You're not going to learn much.
Seeing a move, seeing them engage with each other, right? Just actually seeing elk. Like, we know as deer hunters that's a huge part of our evolution is just watching deer and seeing how they, maneuver, manage things, see things, smell things. If you don't see elk ever, you don't really ever get any kind of, knowledge or understanding of their behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I appreciate you. I've had you for a little over an hour, and I try to, be respectful of everybody's time. Can you tell people a little bit about, cause you've got, obviously you've got the ElkHunt podcast, you've got, an e-scouting course that's really, really good. I went through it. It helped me a ton in preparation for last year. Can you just tell people about those different, things, where they can find you, where they can access that course, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So, you can find the ElkHunt podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Done a lot of episodes. And then on my website, I almost forgot the name of it, ElkHunt201.com. So we do a full course. There's a free e-scouting course. There is a course. My course is based around building a system, right? I'm a very systems oriented person. And if you're that way, maybe you'll appreciate it. And so like, it's about building an elk hunting system and working with, it's not just like, here's how to kill an elk or whatever. It's like, how do you build your system off where you hunt and where you are, what tactics, those type of things, because every place is different. And so I try to help people build their own system, and that's
it's really good. Not like I'm not blowing smoke up your butt. Like, it's from the standpoint, especially if you're getting into elk hunting or have done it a few years, but you're not like a master at it. It's not, the course is very digestible, right? It's not like 30 sessions an hour each, where it's like you just like your brain fog at the end. Like, it's detailed enough, like you said, there's components to the system that you teach people how to build, but it's digestible enough that you can take it even if you're, newer into elk hunting, and you can actually apply it to your scouting, which, like I said, it helped me a lot last year. I went in by myself to a unit that I didn't know anything about. And even though I didn't harvest an elk, I got on elk. Right. And so to me, and the people that I talked to were like, hey, if you did that, like, you were ahead of the ball game in the situation with a lot of people that have never done it before. So totally. But it was very helpful.
That's how my brain works, is like just building a system, this rinse and repeat. It's like how to kill elk without getting lucky is kind of the goal.
How to kill elk by trying. Right?
Yeah.
And then where are you on Instagram?
At the Rich Outdoors. Yeah. So you guys can follow me. It's Rich Outdoors. There's an Instagram for the ElkHunt page too. Something ElkHunt. I forgot. Yeah, underscore somewhere there. You can find it.
Yeah. So I in the show notes, I'll link all your stuff so that people can find it too. Yeah. So I appreciate you jumping on. Tons of great information. Thank you so much for being here, Cody. I appreciate your time, brother.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Rock and roll. Everyone have a great season. Go get them. This section of the podcast is brought to you by Osseo Gear. With its one-of-a-kind raptor camo pattern, Osseo blends seamlessly into the whitetail woods. Osseo's features and technology are designed to fit the unique needs of the bow hunter. With a lifetime warranty, Osseo is designed by bow hunters for bow hunters. Use the code DONOTGO20 to get 20% off any order from the Osseo Gear website. Visit them at osseogear.com. Elevate your game with Osseo.